Good day, everyone, and happy Veterans Day. Yes, yes, it's a very exciting day. And guess what? We're kicking it off with an amazing guest. Today, our guest has over 16 years of experience in nutrition counseling. She specializes in intuitive eating disorders, and she began working with clients who had eating disorders soon after she realized she had her own issues with food and body, including chronic dieting, emotional eating, feeling guilty, and out of control around food. Intuitive eating has changed her life and the lives of her clients to be able to exist and have food freedom. And you guys already know there's always a story to come behind it. Today, she's coming to talk about the challenges and her road to becoming the amazing person that she is today. And for you guys who are tuning in and will be tuning in later, hopefully, you guys you are enjoying this. Do me a favor, leave us a comment, share it. If you haven't already and want to support the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and let us know how you feel about what you think about the conversations that we're having. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my next guest, Jenna Talleda.
For having me. I really appreciate you being here.
Yes, of course, of course. How you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. How about yourself?
I am doing well. I'm doing very well. Give me a second here. Echo. All right. Hmm. All right. We're going to work with it.
Okay.
Do
Sorry if
you
it's
have
distracting.
do you have a do you have anything in your background on?
No, not that I'm aware of. It's
Okay.
just this.
Okay. Not a problem. Okay. So thank you for joining me today. And what I would like to do, I want to take a moment, let you introduce yourself, and then tell people about a little bit about who you are, and then we can get into your story. That sounds good.
Yes, definitely. So, well, thank you for the introduction. That yes, that's part of my story there. It it started like, well, I've been a dietitian for a while now, and throughout my career, I never really felt like even if I worked in different like places like the hospital or with children or with long-term care facilities, I never really felt like I found my niche with all of those. I did the jobs because that's what it was, but it didn't really feel like I was getting to the place where I needed to work. But then I ended up getting this job, um, and it was at a drug rehab center where where I found that a lot of the people who were coming off of their drugs or alcohol, they ended up resorting to their eating disorder behaviors. And or some of them were diagnosed with eating disorders, some of them just had disordered eating habits. And to be honest, at that time I didn't have a lot of experience working with eating disorders, so I did some research to see how I could best support them. And I ended up finding out that intuitive eating was a very successful approach. So mind you, hold on, let me put this do not disturb on here. So mind you, well, like the intention was to read this book for to help my clients and things like that. Um, like as I'm reading this book, I resonated with the information so much. I felt like the authors had written it about me. And it was crazy because I didn't realize that I had any sort of issues at all with food. I mean, the stuff that I was dealing with, it felt so normalized. It was just something that, it felt like most people deal with, or just something that's an everyday kind of thing. I did have emotional eating things going on. I did try several different diets, try to control my weight in different ways. I did have some body image issues, but really it kind of just felt like what the average person's body image issues were. And it didn't feel like anything that was severe or something that needed care. But as I'm reading this book, I realized, oh my gosh, a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with, like I don't have to deal with that. And um what was crazy too is that it, even though I had like all this education and experience, like a lot of the stuff that they were talking about in the book, it contradicted that stuff. And it was like a completely different way of thinking about food. But it was such a like eye-opening, like freeing kind of way of approaching this that it was kind of scary at first because I liked my, my rigid kind of ways of doing things. But it was free, and it let me explore things differently with my body and with food that I didn't have before. And I realized that after reading this book that there was a period of time before that I was actually dealing with what would have been considered an eating disorder, and I didn't know. um, I had gone through a very difficult divorce, and at the time my husband had decided that our marriage was, or that it was okay for his cheating, because I was fat. And so it really just, it really, like, I totally internalized that. And I thought that I had to do something about that in order to feel like I was worthy and to feel like I could be successful and things like that. So I ended up putting myself on this crazy restriction, so crazy that I couldn't even explain it to people. It was so crazy. It was a takeoff of low carb, but I pretty much made it so it was no carb. And that wasn't that wasn't very helpful. I mean, at the time I was very scared of carbs, um, and just because of all of the hoopla around that kind of thing. But yeah, I made it so there was absolutely no carbs whatsoever, and everything had to be made at my house. I couldn't go out to eat. I couldn't go to other people's homes and eat there. um, if there was the very rare occasion that somebody had convinced me to go to a restaurant, I had to be that obnoxious person that sat and told the waiter how to make my food. Like, okay, you can put this in there, you can put that in there, don't put this in there. And I was that person, and I was just like cringing on the inside, like, oh my God, I don't really want to be like that. And my food ended up tasting like crap because I took all the flavor out of it. And but I felt like, I'm doing right. I'm having the willpower, and and all of this. And one of the things that ended up happening, is that even though my body might have ended up changing, like it became smaller, it never ever felt like it was enough. It felt like I was scared that I hadn't lost enough. I was scared the weight would come back. And when it came to things like exercise, I was forcing myself to do things that I really didn't like. And I was pushing myself to limits that weren't the best for my body. One of the exercise, like going to the gym, it wasn't really my favorite thing. I didn't really get any sort of pleasure out of that. But one of the machines that I could tolerate was the elliptical machine.
Okay.
And what I would do is I would push myself to the high levels of the heart rate monitor, the places where they said don't go, because I
Yeah.
didn't feel like if I worked out in the lower ones that there was any purpose to what I was doing. And but when I would come off that machine, I'd be so exhausted, and and it got me to a place where I got burnt out on it and
Mhm.
didn't want to even go in and use any of that stuff. And
Right.
it wasn't a very good thing. And otherwise this would have been kind of looked at as normal, like this is what people do when they do different things, when they're trying to lose weight or be on a health kick or whatever. It was all of that all or nothing kind of thinking.
Right.
And but it got to this place where it was my birthday and it was Thanksgiving too. And I made myself all of the recipes. And at the time, my family tolerated all of the recipes that suited my restriction. And but there was one thing that I made. It was supposed to be a birthday cake, and it does not deserve to be called a cake. It was disgusting.
Yeah, we
It was.
talked about that. I was like, oh
Yes.
no, oh
It
no.
was, yes, it was so nasty. It was just like, it was weird. It was like this goo and it didn't set up right and it was just weird, and it just didn't work. And I forced myself, to eat this stupid thing. And I was thinking to myself, this is my birthday. I want to be able to enjoy my birthday cake, like a real birthday cake,
Right, right.
and so I gave myself the holidays off. And I was like, okay, I'll just come back to this January 1st. And I will I'll do all of the things then. But January came and went and I was just like, I just can't bring myself to live to this extreme
Yeah.
anymore. It just didn't, it was too much. And then to have to go through that period of time where it feels like you're so hungry and so angry and so tired from not giving yourself enough nourishment. I didn't want to deal with that anymore, and so I kind of just let myself kind of be loosey goosey. I wasn't at that level of restriction, and I was including some more things that I liked, but I still was kind of what's called pseudo dieting. There was still some sort of limitations there, and
Let me
yeah.
explain what pseudo diet is.
So pseudo dieting, it's where you don't necessarily think that you're restricting or that you're on any sort of like official diet, so to speak. With very structured, rigid rules, and you have to do X, Y, or Z. That would be like being officially dieting. But pseudo dieting is like where you're not necessarily following something structured, but you're still restricting in some sense. You're still like saying, okay, well, I can have this, but I can only have it in so much, or oh, I can only eat it at certain times, or I can only have this kind of something. I can't have what I really want. And it's kind of like there's still, it's kind of like a lesser degree of dieting, but it's still a restriction in a sense. Do you know what I mean? So um so yeah, so I was still putting those things into place, like to a lesser degree. And then months later, a good while later, that's when I ended up kind of falling into intuitive eating, and realizing that that book was really written, you know, for me. And it's so crazy because I thought, being a dietitian and things like that, and helping other people with their nutrition, I didn't realize that I could potentially have issues with food, but I did. And so I just once I was reading that book and everything finally made sense. everything made sense. It just, even though it was a different way of thinking about food, it all lined up with why these diets don't end up working, why we always feel guilty and out of control with food, why do we emotionally eat, and why does it seem like we can't stop emotionally eating. um why do we have this relationship with exercise and with the scale and things like that. And everything finally fell into place, and it just was like this huge light bulb moment for me. And I realized that as I'm reading this book, that not only did I have my own issues with this, but a lot of the people that I've helped and a lot of people that I just talk to in everyday life,
Mm-hmm.
they have these same kind of concerns too. But because it's so normalized, they might not realize that it's an issue.
Right.
But it really can affect their lives, in more ways than not. So right afterwards, it was like, I knew that this was supposed to be my calling. This was supposed to be what my purpose in life was, is that I was supposed to share this information with the world, and be able to help other people feel good in their bodies and not feel so guilty and out of control of food. So I became certified in it. As soon as I finished reading the book, I worked with a whole bunch of people who specialize in intuitive eating, so I could work on my own relationship with food during that time, and also learn how I could support other people. And that was 7 years ago. And my relationship with food and body is completely different now. And I definitely, I feel a sense of compassion. Like this is a huge self-discovery journey for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps with feeling better about myself, my self-worth. It helps that I don't have to feel bad because I want to eat something that society might say, oh my gosh, that's evil. I
Right.
can instead look at that and say, that's not a me problem. That's a society issue. Because of the way that that's been set up there.
Right.
So that's kind of that's been my journey so far, and I yeah, and I'm so blessed that I was able to experience that, because I don't know if I would have been open to listening to it until that time, you know.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, I got a question. Um,
Of course.
and explain what intuitive eating is. I understand what it is, but for the audience,
Of course.
explain what it is, and then I want to go back to where before you realized that you may have had issues with it a little bit.
Right, sure. So um so intuitive eating is this approach that it's really about cutting out the noise of everybody else telling you how you're supposed to eat and what your body is supposed to look like,
Mhm.
and instead coming into your own body and learning how to recognize and honor what your body is saying. We're fed all of these messages all of the time about, there's a lot of fear mongering around food and nutrients. There's a lot of pressure to take up less space in the world. There's always like jokes of people in bigger bodies made all the time. There's uh, our society is really not designed for people in bigger bodies. Like if you go into a waiting room and the chairs have arms on them, a person in a bigger body may or may not fit into that.
Right.
Or if you go into an airplane, or having different clothes sizes available in the stores and things like that. So this is a way of being able to appreciate your body where it's at, and not necessarily not necessarily trying to constantly fight with the scale to get to some arbitrary size.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's kind of it. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's it in a nutshell.
Now,
Now,
in your
in
journey,
your journey,
before you
before
realized
you
that you
realize that you
possibly had
possibly
issues
had
with food,
issues with food,
what was the
Hmm.
age
was the
that you
age that you
actually started
actually
feeling
started feeling
uncomfortable, or
uncomfortable, or
um,
um,
when did you
when
start?
did you start?
When did you
When
start
did you start
that walk?
that walk?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Um,
when we're younger
when
and
we're
stuff
younger
like
and
that,
stuff
we have
like
a
that, we have
relationship
a
with food because
relationship
we're
with food because
constantly
we're
trying to
constantly
eat
trying to eat
everything, right?
everything,
So
right?
we're young,
Mm,
we're
We're
kids,
young
right.
kids.
and things like that.
Things
Exactly.
like that.
Was yours
Was
more
yours more
when you were
when you
younger,
were
and then
younger,
as you got
and then
older?
as you
Because
got
you
older?
talked
Because you
about
talked about
your husband and
your
things like
husband and
that.
things like that.
What was some of the
Yeah.
What
other
was some of the other
challenges that you
challenges that
experienced
you
before
experienced
you
before
realized?
you realized?
So there was definitely a lot of dieting that was going on during my childhood. Not for me personally, because I was actually in a smaller body when I was younger. Uh, it was only until I was about 20, I ended up getting diagnosed with something called polycystic ovary syndrome, which is a hormonal thing, and it can affect it's a similar, like a cousin to type 2 diabetes with insulin resistance. And I also was having some other issues that were happening at the same time, like um some depression issues and things like that, and my weight ended up ballooning up. But prior to that, I was actually in a position where I was seeing it secondhand when I was younger, because my mom and my sister were in bigger bodies. And they constantly had the pressure from my father and from other family members, other people in the community, to always be smaller. There was even a sign that my dad had put up in the kitchen that said nothing tastes as good as being thin feels. And and honestly, I would have, it was something I saw, but I never would have thought that that was a harmful message when I was growing up. I just thought it was normal. I thought it was just something that we had to do to limit ourselves from that kind of thing. But really, what it was an attempt to try to control us. It was an attempt to try to take us away from what we needed for our own selves, our own bodies, and feel guilty about being hungry or wanting something tasty. Um, as a just a way of controlling. There were other things that were going on that kind of added to that situation. But I remember one scenario. And remember, at that time, I was in a smaller body. There, it was a Saturday afternoon. I got a little hungry, and I was in the mood for one of my mom's chocolate chip cookies. She always made the best chocolate chip cookies. I love them so much, and I really wanted one. I just had that taste for it. And so I come downstairs, and my dad happened to be near the kitchen, and he saw me starting to go in there, and he got all food police on me. And he was saying that, well, why don't you go get an apple instead of a cookie? And I'm like, because I don't want an apple. I want a cookie. And so I ended up going and getting myself a cookie, and I ended up like feeling like I had to run and hide to enjoy my cookie. But that cookie hit the spot exactly how I needed it to. The texture, the flavor, whatever it was. That was what I needed at that moment. But my dad had to be food police with me. And it was so crazy because what's a big deal about a cookie? So yeah, but anyway, so I was getting a lot of messaging there. My mom uh did Weight Watchers on and off throughout my childhood, and there was lots of food messaging around all of that. When I went into college, I initially actually wanted to do something with cancer research or genetics. That was because I learned about it in high school, and it really fascinated me. And so I started studying that, but I realized I realized that that was a little above my head. And so I went and I was like trying to figure out a major that I wanted to do that was somewhat similar. And I saw eventually that dietetics um was a major that had classes similar to that. And I knew that my dad would be super proud of me if I did dietetics. And I sat there and I drilled into all the food police that he taught me into other people, and and so I became that as a result. And there was a moment in time where I was even deciding if I wanted to be a chef or not. And I was going to apply to a really fancy culinary school. But I decided to chicken out and I went the dietetics route instead because I actually really did like talking to people, and I like counseling. Um, so there was a lot of pressure, and then I've had like moments once my body did end up like growing, like I did end up putting on weight as a result of those health things happening.
Mhm.
um and I was going through all of my weight cycling where I'd lose weight and then the weight would come back on and things like that, and bring more with it. My And there were occasions where my dad would body shame me, and uh, he'd say really inappropriate things. Like, I think he was trying to be funny, but it really didn't land well. Um, he said something about my having junk in the trunk, and I'm like, what the hell is that? Why are you talking about my butt, and why are you trying to say that? It was like yeah, no, it didn't really work very well. But then there was this other time that uh we were in the middle of a hurricane, and I was trying to do a puzzle, a little jigsaw puzzle, and I was leaning over this table and I was trying to look because it was kind of difficult with the picture on the puzzle. And so I asked him to bring me a flashlight. And so I'm sitting there holding a flashlight over this puzzle so I could see all the details in there. And he comes over to me and he's like, why don't you sit differently so you could look better? And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Why do I have to look better? For one thing, who else is in this house except for you and me? And second of all, we're in the middle of a freaking hurricane. And why don't I look better right now? Why don't I look okay right now? And so it was always just about like him trying to control our body sizes. And
That's some stuff.
yeah. And I mean the family that he grew up in, um I'm pretty sure that my grandma, my nana on that side, I'm pretty sure that she had anorexia because you could like hug her and wrap your arm around her, and it would come back to you. um and um and and I'm pretty sure that from my pop and my dad, there was always constant pressure to be smaller. And so my dad kind of absorbed that. And for whatever reason, he decided to marry into a family that was full of Eastern European women, who are normally bigger and rounder in size because of like that's what the people in Eastern Europe look like. Um, but he decided to marry into that kind of family, and he ended up having children who looked like that too. but he decided that he needed to control their sizes as well, and make us into something that we weren't.
Right.
So so it was definitely a very challenging situation, and my sister and my mom got like so much more of it than I did, because they were naturally in that size to begin with. And so, it was really hard to just exist in our bodies without having that pressure to be smaller. So
Right.
but again, all of this stuff is so normalized. It's so normalized, and it's so like, oh, but you have to be smaller to be healthier. Well, I've over my research with this intuitive eating and everything in that world, I realized that you don't necessarily have to be smaller to be healthier. You can actually be healthy in
Right.
any body size. And just because somebody is smaller doesn't mean that they're automatically healthy. And just because somebody's bigger doesn't mean they're automatically unhealthy. I've worked with people in both situations like that. Um, and even for myself, when I was at my heaviest weight, um, my blood sugar, my blood pressure, and my cholesterol were all in wonderful places. They were all in great places. They were even at the low normal range for those kinds of things. When I put myself through that really heavy restriction after my divorce, my blood pressure shot up, and so did my cholesterol, and that was in a smaller body. And so, and then when I got back to my regular normal size, they're back to where they are. So the fact of the matter is that we don't have to lose weight in order for those things to be healthier. Um, and also to feel good in our bodies. It's just that
Right.
we're preached at so many times that we need to do that in order to be healthier. But there's so many things that we can do to support our bodies that can help us feel good. That don't it doesn't matter what the scale's going to end up saying. It's we could still feel good in our bodies. So yeah. So
Now
anyway,
you
so that's my
you
thought.
had some challenges,
Yeah.
right? You had, it sounds like a narcissistic controlling dad,
Yeah.
right? A husband who cheated on you, body shamed
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
right? And then from out of all of that, you found a way to turn all of that around and become this amazing, positive person,
Thank you.
and be able to take all of those experiences and be able to help the next person walking
Yeah.
walking that path, right? That is truly amazing,
Thank
So
you
I
so much.
commend you. Yeah, I
Thank
definitely
you.
commend you. That is truly amazing. So now that you've read these books, you started on this journey. What was some of the steps that you started taking and realizing that, hey, you know what? This not a me problem. It's a society problem. I think you touched on this a little bit. Dive deeper into that, because there sounds like there's a little bit more to unpack.
Yeah, definitely. So awareness was my biggest thing. That just giving myself permission to become aware and kind of become an observer of things without feeling the pressure to change anything. That was definitely a big part of it. Also, being able to um, be able to come back into my body, and being able to recognize and honor what my body needed. There's so many times that I sat there and like I forced myself to eat a certain type of way because I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. And I had all of these rules around it. And then when I was able to recognize that it was really those rules that were the problem and not actually me, then it really opened things up. So So yeah, and I mean, this is a process. This isn't like, diet culture teaches us that we can, do steps 1, 2, 3, and we'll have something different in 4 weeks or some weird number like that. Intuitive eating is more of a journey. It's more of a process. It's something that takes time and practice and compassion, to be able to see what's happening, and it takes curiosity too. That's another big part of it, to be able to just look at things and really question them. I I recently, something that I just recently read that was actually, it really hurt my heart, in so many ways, is that the person, who was the first dietitian for the United States, who was like the founder for our country, and she developed the national organization for my profession, which manages my credential.
Mhm.
It turned out that the lady was actually in the eugenics community, and um, and she wrote recipes for, Dr. Kellogg, the guy who was one of the brothers who created the cereal company.
Okay.
He was actually in the eugenics community, and he had this magazine that he wrote all of these articles about that were disgusting. And this lady put recipes in there, and the recipes that she put were ways that she deemed healthy. It was boring food. It was like boiled chicken, boiled potatoes, no flavors, nothing like that. But that's how people at that time, at the white people in America, how they would eat. At the time, this was like at the beginning of the 1900s. There was a lot of immigrants that were coming into the country. They were bringing all their cultures and their foods and all of that great stuff. And this eugenics community didn't like that. and and so their way of trying to preserve that was saying that this was the healthy way of eating. This was the way that we needed to continue. It was the eating white, so to speak. And then that turned into eating right. And it was all just based off this whole eugenics theory that we need to preserve that kind of thinking. And it totally disgusted me that to read that that's where the history of my career comes from, because honestly, if I would have known that, I probably wouldn't have been a dietitian.
Right.
My family was in the Holocaust, and I stand against any form of eugenics, uh, in any sense, against any type of person. And um so to see that this was what what we based the career off of, it breaks my heart. And the reason I share this with people is because there was pressure to be a certain size that didn't people of other cultures, that we had to be this. That's where BMI stems from, is that it comes from, um, like this white European male who didn't have anything to do with, with health in any sense. He was actually a mathematician, and he just like categorizing things based off numbers, and he categorized people based off of their measurements, but the only measurements he used were of white European males like himself.
Mhm.
And we've used that measurement to say that this is the place that we all have to be healthy in, but
Right.
it didn't include anybody from anywhere else, and it didn't include women, other cultures, other races. So the point of my story is that I encourage people to question, put on their critical, thinking hats when it comes to listening to all of this spiel about what our bodies are supposed to look like, and how we're supposed to eat. where did it actually start? How did this actually
Yes.
get created? And and then actually ask yourself, is this something that's going to be supportive for me, considering my culture, my traditions, what foods I have access to, um, uh, you know, if sitting there and obsessing about the scale is actually going to be supportive for me, because
Mhm.
chances are it's probably not. So, so this is this is definitely, it's an important consideration, like when we're thinking about all these things, and when it comes to like the marketing that goes into all of these diets and attempts to try to help you lose weight. Follow the money. Follow the money and realize that a lot of these places are out to make money off your insecurities, and
Yes.
they're out to have repeat clientele as well. So whatever they create, it's intended for you to not work on and come running back and pay them more money. So I encourage you to think about that whenever thinking about those, getting on that bandwagon with the diets, because it really, you have permission to exist just as you are. You're worthy just as you are. You don't have to be smaller to be worthy.
See, and I
See,
love
and I
that
love
because
that because
you touched
you
on
touched
something,
on something.
the
The
history.
history.
Yeah.
Where did it come
Where did it
from?
come from?
Because I
Because
remember a
I
time
remember
where,
a time where
TV used to
TV used to
show
show
uh,
uh,
we wear
we
short
wear short
skirts,
skirts,
right?
right?
Commercials.
Commercials,
And they
and
were
they were
with
with
back then,
back
people
then
would
people would
consider
consider
the
the
models,
models,
right?
right?
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then we
And
look
then
at
we look at
the programs
the
like
program
Jenny
like Jenny
Craig or the
Craig
Rich
or the Richard
Simmons, and
Simmons.
you know what I'm
You
saying,
know what I'm saying?
there's a lot
There's a
to
lot
that
to
went into that,
that
the
went into
body
that, the
shaming.
body
You're
shape.
supposed to look
It's
like
supposed to look
this
like this
and things like
and
that,
things
right?
like that, right?
And it
Mm-hmm.
was just
It was
crazy.
crazy.
And
And
I totally
I
agree.
totally
You don't
agree.
have
You
to
don't
be
have
that
to
small.
be
I've
that
seen
small. I've
small
seen
people
small people
just get
just
sick
get
all the
sick
time.
all the time.
Their
Yeah.
immunity
They're
aren't where it needs to
where it needs
be,
to
and
be. And
people aren't as
people aren't
healthy
as
as they
healthy
used
as they
to.
used to.
And you talking
And
to
you
an
talking to
ex-body.
an ex-body.
I used to be
I used to
300
be
plus
300
pounds
plus pounds
muscle,
Mm-hmm.
muscle,
and I felt
and
good.
I felt good.
But
Yeah.
But
like you said,
like you
I
said,
was on
I was on
strict
a
diet.
strict
You
diet.
know, full chicken, baked
Baked
chicken,
chicken,
very
very
few
few
seasonings.
seasonings.
But I
But I
realized that when
realized that when
I
I grew
grew up
up, I
Southern,
grew up Southern.
Yeah.
right? I
Right?
grew up eating
I grew up
fried
eating
chicken
fried
and pork
chicken and
chops
pork
and all of
chops and
those
all of
things. And
those things. And
I was
I
perfectly
was
healthy.
perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
So
all of these
all
things
of these
kind of
things kind of
change the
change
way
the
and
way
shape the way that
shape
we
the
look
way
at
that
each
we
other
look
in
at each other in
society.
society.
Oh,
Oh,
you can't
you can't be
be big and healthy,
big
or
or
you can
healthy
be
or you
big
can
and
be big
beautiful
and
and things
beautiful and
like that.
things like that.
Whereas
Whereas
that's
that's
totally,
totally,
I'm right there, which
I'm right
is
there, which
totally
is
just a
totally
bunch of
just a bunch of
BS.
BS.
Yeah, it is. And you know, it doesn't even have to be like the, on either end of the spectrum. There's so many people that live in the middle of that place too,
Mhm.
where it's not necessarily the person who's very slender or the person who's in a bigger body. There's people in the gray as well, but we've been taught that we have to live in the BMI box, and our goal in life is to be in that BMI box. And the fact is that when I was on that restriction, that health kick that I was doing, I got to a place where I was borderline, like, overweight. It was 24.9 for that BMI. But when I look at myself in pictures, I did not look well. I looked very scrawny.
Right.
Um, I even had a friend tell me that I didn't look well. And I was like, you're kidding, right? My BMI is 24.9. I'm not there yet. I can't be too skinny. I'm still considered overweight. What are you talking about? And and I didn't take him very seriously. But now that I go back and look at those pictures, I was not well. and it was not the kind of existence that I wanted, where I only felt good about myself briefly for like 5 seconds if somebody had said something nice about my body, or if I glimpsed at myself in the mirror. I After that, it was very fleeting, and I didn't feel good about myself at all after that. I was still obsessed, like, oh my God, it's not enough. And and then that fear of it all coming back and everything after all of that effort that I put in to try to get to that place. And But the fact is that it wasn't my fault that the weight had come back or brought more. It was actually a survival mechanism for my body.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, there's a word. It's called homeostasis. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, tell me what you know about it, and I'll fill in the blanks wherever you might need me to.
Okay, so from what I understand about homeostasis, the body actually slows itself down to where you begin to retain water, excess salt, things like that, which actually, coming from a place of personal training, I'm a certified personal trainer. I've seen water being trapped in between the skin and the muscle, and it
Yeah,
becomes
like
right.
yeah, like edema
If
or
I'm not
whatever.
mistaken.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely part of it. That could be like a sign of different like kidney issues or heart issues and things like that. What homeostasis in a broader spectrum of it is that it's this range where our body is designed to survive the best.
Mm,
And so it happens with like all different mechanisms in our body. It could be like with our temperature. If our body temperature gets too low, then our body will put in mechanisms to help us warm back up, like shivering. If it gets too hot, then we'll sweat to cool us down. um, the same thing goes with all of our other different levels and things like that in our body, because if we were to live in any of those sides of the spectrum that were outside of that survival zone, then we would potentially die. Now, what people, the medical community doesn't seem to grasp is that when it comes to our weight responds in the same kind of way. And while we think that we can have control over it, sure, we can probably make our bodies colder. We could probably make our bodies hotter. But it will bounce back when we're finished with whatever that is. And the same thing goes with our weight. So, like, for example, there's to kind of simplify it, um, there's like three different things that tends to happen when we go on a intentional weight loss thing, even if we're not intending to lose weight. Our bodies don't recognize that that's intentional. Our bodies just think that we don't have food and that we're in some sort of famine. And so on one side of things, it will make it harder to lose. So that could show up as like a plateau with that weight loss, or with each consecutive time that you're trying to lose weight, it gets harder and harder to lose. On the other side of things, your body wants to make sure that you're getting enough to eat. So it will increase things like uh, increased thoughts of food, stronger hunger cues, cravings for various kinds of things. And then on the other side of it, it makes it easier to put weight back on because it needs to protect you from future famines,
mm,
especially if you've kind of been doing this over and over again. So it's kind of why our weights end up regaining back, and why we end up having these what feels like out of control sessions with food after we've been dieting. And why it just seems like it's been placed on us as our fault, but it's actually what our bodies are supposed to do to help us survive. And
okay.
so the yeah, so What are your thoughts about that?
I think when I think about that, I think about the animals during winter time, right?
Yeah.
It's a survival mechanism. You have to
Yeah.
put on weight in order to, in order to survive throughout the winter because food is very scarce. You have to put on
Mhm.
extra body fat and things like that. Just okay, say like for bears, they have to hibernate, so they're not eating during the season, and so their body needs something to metabolize to keep their heat up during those cold winter.
It's true. That's a really valid point right there.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
a
that's what I think about when I hear that. And our bodies are primarily the same. And
right.
I've noticed that when I was 300 pounds of muscle, my body fat percentage was down, but I stayed cold.
Yes.
Whenever the weather changed, it wasn't until I got my body fat percentage back up to around, I'd say 18%,
Yeah.
where I felt good, right? Your body is no longer struggling to pull nutrients or feeding off the muscle, right? And I felt like I had a lot more energy.
Yeah, exactly. Because you were feeding yourself. You were eating more consistently. You were getting a variety of different kinds of things in there as opposed to just being limited to you were mentioning like boiled chicken and other types of foods and that's very limited and things like that. And I mean, while those things might have supported your body during those fights, it doesn't mean that the other foods out there wouldn't have supported you too.
Right.
Um, so, but yeah, I mean, and I understand too, because I believe me when I say that I know that I bet people are probably screaming at this video right now and they're saying, Jenna, what the heck are you talking about? This, you have to do this, you have to be smaller, you have to be healthier, you got to do this, that, and the other thing. I know, I understand the screaming back at the video. I get it because I was screaming back at the book when I was first reading it too, and it was definitely contradicting a lot of stuff that I thought that I knew well.
Mm-hmm.
And but this even though this does feel different than what you're used to hearing, um I find that when we can get over that initial shock that it's different and we can start working through these things, it can feel more comfortable, it can feel more safer with it all. But it does feel kind of scary because it is different, so I can understand that. Um but you honestly don't have to live in that kind of way. You don't have to sit there and go weight cycle back and forth, or sit there and tell yourself that you have to eat in a certain type of way. Even if we're talking about different health conditions,
Right.
like one of those in particular is like diabetes, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Carbohydrates get such a bad rap. They get such a bad rap. They're like, uh, everybody makes them out to seem like the most evil nutrient on the planet. And they're only there to like create our demise or something like that. That is such a load right there.
It
It
really
is so
is.
not it's so not true. And if you think about it, back, what was it, like 20, 30 years ago, um fat was the shunned nutrient. Everybody was like fat free or low fat everything. But now today our shunned nutrient is carbohydrates. And it's because of diet culture. They just want to kind of promote that mindset. But people with diabetes, especially like when they listen to their doctors and they're all like, you have to stop eating carbohydrates and all of this, or you have to eat less of that, or blah blah blah. I appreciate the medical community and their experience and education and things like that, but when we tell people that they're not allowed to have something or they can only have it in so much,
Mm-hmm.
for one thing, those other folks, they don't know how hungry or full the person is. They don't know what's going to be satisfying. They don't know what they have access to. And another thing too is that it creates this cycle that happens. It's this restrict binge cycle. Um, Something is put like limited, whether it's the type, the amount, or when we're allowed to have it. And the deprivation starts building up. And it could be a slow build up or it could be really fast. But eventually it gets to a place where we feel like we just can't take it anymore. And we're like, and we get this urgency to eat it like quickly, and we feel we get to a place of uncomfortable fullness, or we might eat it in a way that we hide from other people because we feel ashamed about it. But then the guilt and the shame creeps in because we feel like we're out of control. And then the cycle starts back over again because we feel like we've got to restrict again in order to control ourselves. But the thing is that when the problem is not necessarily the urgency of eating quickly or the uncomfortable fullness, where it actually starts is with that restriction in the first place. Because if we didn't have that in there, then the rest of it probably wouldn't have happened. You know, it kind of just it puts that food up onto a pedestal and makes us obsess about it. And that's what creates that cycle. So when we can break that cycle, that's when we can start having a better relationship with food and start listening to what our body is saying rather than trying to listen to all of that noise. So,
Wow. See, I love the way you broke it down because it makes total sense, right? Because when I was coming up, and we show you, the food pyramid. Who came up with that?
The USDA, I don't know.
Like you said, it was people that came in and modeled behind what they wanted
Right.
and what they look like.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer. Everybody has a different model. And
It's true.
so I don't get into the whole eating right for your body. I tell people when you're hungry, right?
Yeah.
And just be mindful of how your body responds.
That definitely is a part of it. There could be a part mixed in there about the anxiety of the food, though. You know, if there's any sort of morality that's attached to it, then that could contribute to how your body ends up digesting it and things like that. But if there's actually something going on, like you have some sort of allergy to it, or, you know, maybe some sort of lactose intolerance or what have you, you know, that's something to definitely keep in mind. When it comes to intuitive eating, it's very easy to turn that into a hunger fullness diet, but it's not. It's not a eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full, because that's not how life usually goes. There might be times where we're crazy busy, and while I encourage you to eat consistently throughout the day, sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen as we would want it to. And so we might find ourselves swinging back and eating until we get uncomfortably full as a result of that. But and then on the other side of things, we might have to eat a little bit more when we're not hungry, because we've gotten used to restricting so much that our body cues end up getting super quiet and we can't recognize them. So there's a little bit more to it than just eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full. But I would encourage people to definitely start tuning into what their body is saying, and notice if there's other distraction pieces coming in there, like crazy days, or if you're, you know, consumed with thoughts or pain or other things that make it harder to notice those cues, and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I'm
processing it.
processing.
Wow,
Wow,
that
that
is
is
deep, man. That's
deep, man.
truly deep
That's truly
because it
deep
makes me
because it
think
makes
about
me
those
think
people,
about
like you
those people,
said,
like you
that
said,
may
that
be dealing with
may be dealing
medical
with
issues
medical
like
issues like
diabetes,
diabetes,
thyroid
thyroid
problems, and things
problems,
like
and
that. And
things like that. And
I work with a lot of
a
people
lot of people
um,
um,
get themselves
get
back
themselves
together
back
and
together
regulate the
and
Yeah.
right
regulate the
sort
right
of
sort of
supplements for them.
supplements for
You
them.
know,
You know,
I always give
I always give
suggestions.
suggestions.
I never, nothing is ever
Nothing is
clunky
ever
because your
clunky
body may
because your
change,
body may change,
right, as you
right?
start to
As you
go
start
through
to
it.
go
The
through it.
foods
The
that you
foods
eat,
that you eat,
like one of the things I
one of the
realized
things
is
I
that,
realized is
when I got
that,
older,
when
I
I got
developed
older,
a
I
shellfish
developed a
allergy,
shellfish allergy,
Okay.
right?
right?
Yeah.
And the one thing
And the
that I
one thing that
realized is
I
that it was
realized is that
easier
it
for
was
me to
easier
gain
for me to
weight,
gain weight.
when I was younger.
When I was
It's
younger,
still easy
it's
for me
still
to gain
easy
weight,
for me to
depending
gain
on
weight,
what I
depending
eat.
on what I eat.
Carbs,
Hard
on the
for
other
the
hand,
on the
right?
other hand, right?
Right.
Sweet
Sweet
potatoes.
potatoes.
Um,
Um,
there was a few other
there was a
things
few
that
other
I did
things that I did
and everything,
and
and
everything,
I
and I
realized that the way
realized that
my
the
body
way my body
processed it
processed it
was not in a
was
negative
not in a
way,
negative way,
Mm-hmm.
right?
right?
It broke it
It
down,
broke it
gave me the
down, gave
energy
me
that
the
I
energy
needed,
that I needed,
and I felt
and I felt
great
great
doing it.
doing it.
Animal
Okay.
fats,
Animal
right?
fats, right?
I used to,
I used to,
whenever I used to eat,
whenever
when
I
I
used to eat,
finally
when I
realized
finally
that my
realized that
body
my
was
body
feeding
was
off of
feeding
itself,
off of itself,
I would go
I
out,
would go out
whenever I went out to
whenever I went out
restaurants,
to restaurants.
I would say,
I
hey,
would say, hey,
whatever fat
whatever
that you cut
fat
off
that you
that
cut off
steak,
that steak,
pick it up and put
pick
it
it
back
up
on the
and put it
plate
back
for
on
me.
the
And
Mm-hmm.
so I would
And
make it
so
a
I would make it
point
a
to
point
get
to
get
get
that
those,
fat
get that
in my body,
in my body,
avocados, things like
avocados,
that,
things like that,
peanut butter,
Yeah.
peanut butter,
all of those things.
all of those
And
things.
people say,
People
oh,
say,
don't do
oh,
that,
don't do
right?
that, right?
Yeah.
Like you said,
Like
you
you said,
realize
you
that there's
realize
a
that there's
huge
a huge
misconception
misconception
about our
about our
relationship with
relationship
food
with food
and how
and
our body
how our
responds
body
to it
responds to it
and how
and
it makes
how
us
it
feel,
makes us feel,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Anxiety, everything
Anxiety,
else that's
everything else that's
associated with it.
associated with it.
I love your
I love
approach
your
to it.
approach to it.
Take all that stuff and
Take all
throw it
that
out
stuff and throw it out
and develop a
and
different
develop a
mindset
different
about
mindset about
it and
it and
Yeah.
eat the way
eat
that
the
you
way that you feel
and be
Yeah.
happy,
and be happy,
right?
right?
Don't let
Don't let
society go, oh,
society
it's
go,
a
oh, it's
society
a
thing.
society.
Don't let the
Don't
weight
let
come
the
and
weight
bring
come
it.
and bring it.
It's a
It's a
society thing.
society
It's
thing.
not a
It's
you
not
thing.
a you thing.
You
It's
should
so
You should
true.
deserve to be
It's so true. It's so true. And yeah, and one thing I like to say is like if there's people who are criticizing your food or your body or whatever, it's usually a reflection of their own issues with food. It's not really yours. I mean, it's in most cases, it's not usually the person who's receiving the message, it's the person who's delivering the message that
Okay.
needs to talk about their own insecurities and project them onto other people. Um, so so yeah. I always say one of my strategies is pretending that you're holding up a mirror, but you're looking at the backside of the mirror and the other person's looking at the mirror part,
Mm,
and that way it's kind of a barrier. It's kind of a barrier. It's not ours to absorb any of that criticism. It's theirs to recognize that it's within themselves. And it's not I'm not saying, that it's your job to say, oh well, look at yourself and blah blah blah, why aren't you doing this about yourself? No, I'm not saying that. This is really more of just a way of a silent barrier between you and those words, so you don't end up taking them within yourself, because they're not yours to fix. It's theirs to fix within themselves.
wow.
wow.
I love
I
that.
love that.
I love that.
I love that.
And
And
normally,
Yeah.
normally,
and you just
and
said
you just
something
said
very
something
powerful
very
there. And
powerful
normally
there.
I
And
would
normally
wrap
I
up
would
the
wrap up
show
the
with,
show with,
hey, what would you
hey, what
say?
would
And
you
you just
say? And
put
you
it out
just put
there,
it
man.
out
And
there,
I
man. And
love
I
that.
love that.
So
So
how can people
how can
find
people
you?
find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, and I'm your.nutrition.ally on Instagram.
Mhm.
So I'd love for you guys to follow me there. I have a group that I have going on. It's a monthly membership. We meet every Tuesday, and we talk about these kinds of things. And it's called Permission to Exist, and it's
Mhm.
permission to exist in our bigger bodies, and without having the need to change them, because we live in such a world that's so focused on trying to do that, that we need safe spaces where we can exist and not have to feel like we're doing something wrong because our bodies are different. So if thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jenna,
Jenna,
thank you for being on the show and having such an amazing conversation. Very
Really
intuitive.
intuitive.
And
And
thank you for being
thank you for being
amazing. Thank you
amazing.
for
Thank you
taking the
for
time
taking
to
the
learn
time
these
to
things
learn
and
these
be able
things
to
and be
help
able
other
to help
people
other people
that are going
that
through
are
those
going
things.
through those things.
And you know,
And
for
you know,
those
for
who are
those who
tuning
are
in,
tuning in,
please, her links
please,
will
the
be
links
down
will be
below.
down
Reach
below.
out to her
Reach out
if
to
you,
her
if
if
you guys
you
want to know
guys
more
want to
about
know
it,
more about it,
more about what her
more
groups
about
are
what her
about,
groups are
things
about,
like that.
things like
Reach
that.
out to her.
Reach out to her.
And
And
with that being
with that
said,
being said,
I
I
appreciate you.
appreciate
Thank
you.
you for
Thank
being
you for being
amazing.
amazing.
Thank you.
For everyone
For
else that are
everyone else that
tuning
are
in,
tuning in,
happy
happy
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
Guys, go out and
Guys, go
enjoy
out
the
and
rest
enjoy
of
the
the
rest
day.
of the day.
And until next
Until
time,
next
I am
time,
Jimmy
I am
Lynch. I am your
Lynch. I am
host.
your host.
And
And
we love you. Thank
we
you
love
for
you. Thank
allowing
you
us
for
to
allowing us
bring
to
these
bring
stories
these
to you
stories
and
to you.
the amazing
The
support
amazing
that
support
you
that
give us.
you give us.
You guys have a
You
great
guys have
one.
a great one.
Bye. Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.